we are all basically on a pathway. And so many times when you hear Native people talk about education, they don't use the word education, they use your path, your pathway, or your way. And so we have various ways, okay, that we practice that allow us to come to some place where not only enlightenment but also knowledge resides. And so it embodies the idea that education and life is always a journey. I wrote a book called Book to the Mountain almost too many years ago to remember. For us, where I live, among the Pueblo people, we bound our sacred space by 4 sacred mountains. And those mountains have a great meaning to us, ceremonially, of course. But they're also very, very particularly important to us physically, because this is where the watersheds that reside, where the life-giving waters come from, that feed our fields, and feed ourselves, and feed our streams. And so the water, the clouds, the mountain, and the directionality of orienting yourself in the sacred space created by 4 sacred mountains that we recognize becomes the place in which we live, understand, and come to know ourselves as a people of the place. So, as we move forward, we are led by a mythological character whose name is Kokopelli. And Kokopelli has become very famous in the Southwest. It's almost the icon of the Southwest. You see Kokopelli signs everywhere, even in Walmart. Shower curtains. And that's an interesting play because Kokopelli is a trickster, and we'll play with it that way. But it's also a very profound and very deep symbol for Pueblo people. It means essentially the procreative spirit that dwells within us as human beings, but also dwells within all of nature. So when the Kokopelli is out, that's what is represented. The Kokopelli is the seed bringer, the seed planter, the seed carrier. And so as we think about, Kokopelli plays a special kind of music, that in a sense resounds or resonates to remind us about things that are important in the context of our life and also in the context of our relationship to life. Indigenous people have, really, hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies that sort of embody, reflect this whole notion of relationship to particular plants or animals that they recognize as giving them life. And so, just as one example, the first salmon ceremony that's performed in the northwest by many of the tribes there is a representation of a whole complex of thinking about your relationship to a resource that gives you life, because the first salmon ceremonies are, in a sense, surrounded by story, by people's feelings, people's interrelationships. It embodies a whole story complex as well as ritual complex. And so when you look at indigenous ceremonies, wherever you find them in the world, they very much are similar. They're based on the same similar principles of this, what I call a high context interrelationship that is established, that brings people together in community to remember who they are, how they are related, why they are dependent on each other, the importance of establishing and maintaining those relationships for generations and times, and even the exchange of goods and economies, and feasting and dancing and arting, and all of the things that happen in these kinds of ceremonial situations. But the first salmon ceremony, I think, is a good example because it represents that human environmental interdependence. It also in a sense, is the historic basis, the actual practical historic basis of indigenous well-being. It's a relationship to a resource or resources that allow the life of the people to continue in sustainable ways within the context of the places in which they historically live. So that brings us to this whole notion of what it is to recreate indigenous education, given this history and this, in a sense, this heritage. And for me, as the slide sort of depicts, it's an Iroquois artist. It's on the cover of the October 1992 National Geographic. It's called 1491. And it basically reflects on how America was before the Columbus expedition. And also reflects on what has happened since. And so for me, the Iroquois artist in this case, represents what I would call that notion and that consciousness of interdependence, interrelationships with plants, with animals. The idea that Turtle Island itself is this one huge conscious entity or being that we live on Turtle's back. And so she feels all of the thoughts and ideas and acts that we perform. And so for me, I would call this a spiritual ecology, because that's basically what it's about. It's this integration of human spirituality with the natural world in very direct and tangible ways. For me, this is the basis of a recreation of indigenous education. As I say, they're teaching and learning which is transformative and anticipates change and innovation. For me, indigenous education can integrate and apply principles of sustainability along with appropriate community environmental knowledge. And likewise, indigenous education for me forms a foundation for community renewal and revitalization. For a very long time, Native Studies programs, in a sense, were captured by the academy. They were poor step children of anthropology, history, sociology, the disciplines of the academy. The last 20 years, many Native educators, Native studies professors have said, we've had enough of this and we've moved on to begin to explore in terms of creating some new expressions of Native education. So this is what's going on as we speak.